Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Laura Cathcart Robbins is the author of Stash, My Life in Hiding. Laura is an author, freelance writer, speaker, and host of the popular podcast, The Only One in the Room, which, by the way, she was kind enough to invite me to be a guest on, which I did, and it was really fun. Her work has appeared in HuffPost, The Tempest, and more. She lives in California. This book was so good. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Stash, My Life in Hiding.
Yay. Thank you, Zibby. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure to have you. Thank you, by the way, for having me on your wonderful podcast, The Only One in the Room podcast.
My pleasure.
It's great. I know you listeners can't see this right now, but Laura's wearing this very cool black sweater with like embroidered stash written on it with some very fun little, I don't even know how to describe,
like
embellishments. Yeah, really awesome. Best swagwear I've ever seen of a book. So Laura, I was starting to say, like, I peeked into this book, which I had read in an earlier draft, thinking I would remember everything. And I got so drawn in, I read all through the night. It's so good. The final draft is so good. It just blew my mind. I could not put it down. The final scene, oh my God. I was like, oh, it was so good. It was just so good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell listeners about the story now that I've raved.
Okay. So it's Stash, My Life in Hiding is about a 10-month period in my life in 2008 when I filed for divorce. I was spiraling down into a pill addiction. And I was also at the same time Parent Association president. I had just been asked to join the board of my kids' school. I was in a high-profile marriage. And so I had all these stakes where I felt like I needed to show up exactly the same way I had been showing up before the addiction took me down. And at the same time, I felt like I needed the pills in order to show up. So it wasn't an option to stop taking the pills and continue to show up for my life or my family. At that point, I had 2 young kids. Boys who were 2 grown boys now. And so the journey is I file for divorce. I spiral down into addiction. I get to a rock bottom where I know that I have to get help. I go to treatment to get help, a place called the Meadows in Arizona. And the hour after I check in, I meet this guy who is, optimistic, kind of feckless, very curious about me. I am not interested in a relationship at all. Obviously, I'm dealing with a lot, but he becomes like my rock in treatment. And we end up staying connected afterward. He lived in another state. I live in Los Angeles.
Wait, don't give it away.
Okay.
Stop.
All right. So basically, it's about that 10-month period in my life. I filed for divorce, and I check into treatment for a drug and alcohol addiction, and I get sober.
And how many days sober are you now?
Oh, I don't know how many days. I've been sober since August 14th, 2008. So 14 plus years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. We should do the days though.
I have an app. I'll look it up while we're talking.
Okay.
It'll tell me exactly how many days I've been sober. It is 5,270 days sober.
Oh, that's amazing. That's such an accomplishment. Because I feel like I'm still with you as the newbie, right? When you hit 60 days and oh my gosh, I just That's such an accomplishment to fast forward and
Thank you.
from there to here. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
There's so much to discuss. First of all, your love for your boys is so clear on every page. I don't know if they've read it yet or not, but every move you made, everything was just radiating love and respect for them. And I just felt like it was one big hug to those boys. So I hope that they know and they feel it and that they've read it. If they've read it, I don't know if, are they going to read it?
My older one, severely dyslexic, does not read, will wait for the audiobook to come out. So it's a possibility that I'll listen to it. It's certainly not his genre. It's not anything he would ever read.
Yeah.
The younger one has started to read The Galley. And
Wouldn't it be funny though if you're like, oh, my son's great. He mostly likes to read memoirs about middle-aged women. You'd be like, oh yeah, okay.
That would be really funny.
It would, yeah.
Yeah. My younger one is actually a screenwriter and he reads a lot. So this is something he sees it so far. He's just started it as being very cinematic. So it is cinematic part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
The July 4th scene in particular was just so, all of it was so vivid. And so it was told in such scenes, so visual. So, oh my gosh. You said in the introduction to the book that, your ex was, thank you and thanked him for letting you tell the story. This is a lot about memoirs by nature, right? Of the genre are so revealing about your own life, but also those around you. And just tell me about how he's came to be okay with it or how you dealt with that situation and all of that.
Well, you and I actually had a conversation about this a while ago. And this is my life. This is my life story. This is a story that I felt was that was really important to tell for a variety of reasons, not just for addiction, but also for the divorce element.
Yep.
And the hanging on to my marriage element when it wasn't serving anyone anymore, and how terrifying that was to let that go. Even with all of there were so many good elements to my marriage as well. There was still so much love there. It was really difficult to make the decision and to not be a family anymore, to not be, and we are still a family, but to not be the family that we were. And so I felt like that was important to write about because especially I was 43 at the time of, when in the time period I'm writing about, and so many of my friends, my peers, were starting to look at their marriages the same way that I was. They were starting to consult with divorce attorneys. They were looking at, the two houses, the two Thanksgivings, the two birthdays. And I also wrote this book for them, for anybody that's coming up on that precipice, wondering what they should do. The way that my ex and I are now is we're really friendly. And we have, I'm patting myself on the back because I think we did an amazing job co-parenting our boys, and we continue to do so. It was just during COVID that I stopped going to his house for Thanksgiving with him and his wife. They just didn't do a big dinner because of COVID, and which I completely understood. And now they're moving out of the city where I live, but people come to me and want to know how it's so good. Like how was the marriage so admirable, and how is your divorce also so admirable? And so writing about it was tricky because I had to reveal some things, nothing, I don't think that anybody would look at it and go, oh, it's your fault. Oh, it's his fault. But intimate details about my life and about our life together. And he's a very private person. Believe it or not, I am too, which seems really it doesn't make sense because I've written this very revealing, vulnerable memoir. But I'm not someone who talks about my relationships in detail with my friends. I give them broad strokes. There are just certain things I keep private. And so I really respect his privacy. My idea was to make sure that he wasn't blindsided by anything, that he didn't hear that I was thinking about writing this book from anyone else, that he didn't hear that I'd procured an agent, that he didn't hear that I'd sold it to Simon and Schuster. And, all of that was to come from me. And I got to tell you, he's just been so supportive along the way, and some great conversations about my story and his understanding that it is my story to tell. There were a few parameters that we both discussed before it went to first pass. And I think we were both really okay with what stories I wouldn't tell and what stories I would. I think that my story didn't suffer from the editing of those parts out. Actually, I didn't edit them out. I just didn't put them down on paper.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that was
Amazing.
That was our journey with that. Yeah.
I feel like you touched on your relationship with your stepfather, and you gave it some time, but I feel like that could have been its own book if you had really gone there and told us about your childhood. I feel like it must have been an intentional choice you made, how much to tell about that as well, when some other areas were so revealing. And you, as the reader, already does, right? You help connect the dots. Perhaps I am this way because of this, but maybe you could shed a little more light on that sort of abusive relationship in your own childhood.
That was one of the hardest parts for me to write, which is probably why there's not as much of it. I really didn't want to write about him. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it was necessary because there is a dynamic in my life that was created between he and I that carries over into my teenage years and adult life. And the reader needed to know where that dynamic began and how it started. So I really took a long time, at that time in my life when I got sober, he and I had not reconciled, and he had passed by the time I got sober, but we hadn't reconciled before then, and I hadn't forgiven him. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, the abuse was emotional. It wasn't physical. It wasn't sexual. And I don't want to diminish any of those, but for me, the impact of that was horrific. Like it was impossible to be myself during my childhood when he was around. And I know I know how it impacted me. I know how it felt then, but I didn't realize how much it impacted me as an adult. So my editor was very gentle, but asked me to go back and look at that some more. And so I did. And yeah, it's just hard to write about him. And I think I've forgiven him now, but I won't ever really know because he's not here. I forgive people in my head all the time. And then I see them and I'm like, it all comes back up again. And so I have to, I may not ever really know, but it doesn't weigh heavy on me now. It doesn't occupy space in my head the way that it used to. So hopefully it's done.
And has it ever affected, have you ever really sat down and talked to your mom about it?
I have. And without telling too much of her story, she sees things that she could have done differently now, things that she would have done differently now. But at the time, she was unable to do those things. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. This divorce lawyer you had, just to go in a completely different direction, Nancy, I don't know if that's her real name or not.
No.
No. Okay. There was a lot in here about, she's like a main character essentially, in how she led you through your divorce and like the lens that she so desperately wanted you to put on and see things through, which, I'll leave the reader to find out what ends up happening. But when you look back on this whole relationship and with other people getting divorced and turning to lawyers, like what's your hindsight 2020 view of the situation?
Just like, Ambien is a really good drug for most people and it's very effective. And that's what I was addicted to. I think she's an incredible lawyer, but she probably wasn't the right fit for me. And I was too I was too messed up to think about getting some, and I was too far in, honestly, to switch, or I could have switched, but I was too messed up. But, her assessment of my situation was very clear. There's this that's available, and here's the path so that we get as much of it as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really it. And my goal was very clear, which was I need to stay in my kids' lives. And at times our goals, hers, Nancy's and mine, were at odds. And it was, it's something to have someone fighting for you. And she was the only one fighting for me at times. And I'm so grateful to her. But then there were times where I was fighting her so that she could fight for me the way that I wanted her to fight for me, or fight for the things that were my priorities. And so I think, knowing what I know now, I don't know that I would have survived going to court with my sobriety intact. I really don't think I would have. And if we had gone further, I would have had to. So I think I made the right decisions while I was with her, but it was very difficult. And she was, man, I call her a shark because she is, she's still around. She was actually, I got a magazine delivered to my house. That's a local magazine here. And she was on the cover of it.
Oh no.
3 weeks ago. I haven't seen her since then.
Oh my gosh.
So funny. So
Wow.
She's definitely still doing her thing, but that's, I think that she and I, if my priorities had been different, we would have been more aligned and probably had a better experience.
You touch in your introduction, but also all throughout the book, about sort of this intersection between race and privilege and you and where you fit into this whole sphere, and tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's the race thing is really interesting because if you think about the role models we have for recovery, right? As women, I can't think of any Black ones, honestly. There's Brene Brown, who was, amazing, and this model of recovery. There's like Elizabeth Vargas, who was the newscaster who got sober. And then I can't think of any other ones right now, but none of them are Black. If I were to think of more, they wouldn't be Black. And then, there are white men as well, like Rich Roll, the podcaster, and Dax Shepard, who's also a podcaster and an actor, and then Matthew Perry, right? These are our role models for recovery. So being in the situation where I was in this leadership position in my community, I was in, like I said, this high profile marriage, and there was a certain status that I enjoyed very much, but it came, at a cost, which was that I felt like I needed to maintain that status at all costs. And the cost for me, as people will read, is very dear, but I wanted to maintain it at all costs. And there was an extra layer, I thought, for me, for being one of the only Black parents in the school, for being, one of the only Black moms in my community. If I failed, if I was the one, then I would be the example for recovery and for what happens when Black people try to get sober. It's like, oh, she didn't make it, oh, so-and-so, or she's failed. I had this huge, probably still have it, fear of failure. I don't think it's acute now. But at that time, I just, I thought I would die if I was exposed, if, there obviously imposter syndrome. But race for me was a huge part of it because I wanted to be the example of Black excellence. And I felt like I needed to be for all the other Black moms to come, for all the other Black people in my community. I could not fail. Yeah.
Wow. And yet you have moments like that. And then all these scenes where you're like hiding out from your housekeeper.
In the garden.
Is she still your housekeeper?
No. She was the worst. Oh my goodness. I mean, you see in the book, she was on me, and, she actually was probably great because she knew what was going on, or she suspected. If anybody knew, it was her, because she has, she's in everywhere. But yeah, she and I were at odds the whole time. So as soon as I could, I got rid of her.
You said it was hard writing the part about your stepfather. How about the rest of it? Did it all just come out? Like, did you know you wanted to write this book? And was it hard or easy?
Never sat in front of a blank page. It was always pouring out of me. There are a couple of scenes with my kids that I was crying through. Like Diane Keaton in As Good as It Gets, or Something's Got to Give.
Yeah.
Crying over her keyboards, like that's what I was doing. And I definitely had to take breaks, but it wasn't because I didn't know what to write next. It was because the emotional toll it was taking on me was too great. And I needed a break where I would watch the Mary Tyler Moore Show or I Love Lucy or something and just kind of erase that feeling in me and just distract myself from it, I guess. And then go back to the keyboard. Yeah.
My gosh. Well, the result is so good. And tell me about the cover. I love the cover. So the cover is hot pink with a couple pills and a hand like kind of reaching in to grab one, but cool font. And I mean, I love it. It's so cool.
Thank you. The font is the same font that they use for blaxploitation films back in the 70s, Foxy Brown and Coffee and like those types of movies. That was a deliberate choice so that there was some culture brought into it. It's also the font for Valley of the Dolls, which looks a lot like this cover, or I guess my cover looks a lot like that. It is covered with pills, which I like. The hand was an interesting touch. There was no hand at first, but I really thought it was important that you could tell this was written by a woman of color. And we didn't know how to do that with the cover because it was so fabulous, with all the pills and so the hand reaching for a pill was the publisher's idea, and it looks exactly like my hand. and it's wearing a nice big rock. So it shows that she's married, there's privilege there. The hand tells a story in itself, and I think the cover does as well.
Totally. Got the French manicure going.
Yep.
Yeah. So for someone who hasn't read your story, like who do you desperately want to reach with your book?
I want really desperately anyone who is afraid to be themselves in whatever circumstance they're in, and to see how painful my journey was to live authentically. Hopefully, people who are afraid to be themselves don't have to go through what I went through in order to find that freedom to be themselves. I don't want to be a cautionary tale, but I certainly don't mind being one if it helps anybody. And it is about addiction, but it is really about living authentically, and how I was afraid to do that for so long, starting with my stepfather, because I had to change who I was in order for the house to be okay. And so, I started stashing away pieces of myself, which ended up with me stashing drugs and alcohol all over the house and reclaiming that, after I got sober. And not just because I got sober, but because there was this moment of clarity that I had that led to action that I didn't want to take, which led to me discovering that the fear was, as they say, a mile wide, a mile high, and paper thin. I could walk right through it.
It's amazing. I feel like, coming into your authentic self, you talked so much about like dissociating and how like you used to dissociate from everything. And now you're just like the opposite of that. I don't know if it's associating or just being so present, but you get that from you right away. And it's just so great. And here you are like in your element, like giving your all to the world. And it's just so cool to watch.
Thank you, Zibby.
So thank you for coming on. And for anybody still listening, Laura is coming to our retreat. I'll say this again at the beginning, but in Charleston. So there are still, at this recording at least, some tickets left if you want to come meet her in person. And she'll be at Zibby's Bookshop at some point. I got to get the date. When is it? March
23rd.
March 23rd at Zibby's Bookshop in Santa Monica. So you can go meet her in person. Anyway.
I can't wait.
Laura, thank you. I'm so impressed. I couldn't put it down. It was so good. Congratulations. Really awesome. Okay. That's it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.